And welcome back to another special edition episode of the Thompson's Comic Corner. This one's unedited, untimed. There's no time limit. We're not bound just to the half-hour time limit. We're going to go as long as we can talk, and boy, can we talk. So I always bring a new co-host every episode, and this time I'm bringing back somebody he ain't been here for a while. It's been a while. It has been a while. So I'm bringing
Wow.
you hear the laugh right there. You know who it is. I'm bringing Andy from Last Comic Shop podcast. He is the host with the most. Today he's the co-host with the most.
Wow. My goodness. My good. Well, it's okay. Sometimes in life you're the host, sometimes you're the co-host. It's just exciting to be able to talk about comic books. So thank you so much for having me on your show today, Zach.
So we are going to do something fun for the month of July. So not only am I bringing on like my usual every Friday we have a new episode hit YouTube and Spotify, and Thursday and Tuesday we play on the radio. I'm also going to be dropping once a week these special just kind of jam sessions with a bunch of people that you've heard before, and we're going to do what I call the month of decades. So for me and Andy, I approached him with the 1960s, which everything from Amazing Fantasy 15 to Vampirella will be talked about in this. And we are sprinkling in a couple more things, but those are like the two. I had to start with like the most popular, even though Fantastic Four came out before that, but we'll get to that. But those would be the two most popular books that we talk about from the beginning to the end.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think that's a pretty good intro. And then we got the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and then we do the 2000s. And then I think I
Wow.
stopped there. Yeah, I think.
Just stop. Just you just
Yeah,
put a pin in it. Maybe you'll come back. Who knows? You might want to do
yeah.
2010s at some point. But yeah, the 2010s just finished not too long
Yeah,
ago. So you got to
so
give it a
we
little
got
more
time to
time.
get there.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
so we're starting in the 1960s, and as everybody knows, you can't start without the Fantastic Four would be your best starting point. At least that's what I thought. Now,
Oh yeah,
granted,
no,
go
it
ahead.
is. No, I was going to say it is, but it isn't. There was a lot of stuff that happened in comic books well before the Fantastic Four or the Amazing Spider-Man. Part of how I hope I'm on this show is to hope to kind of educate not only you but some of your listeners on the things that kind of led up to the 1960s. It's always good to kind of get a sense of like what was happening in comic books and why the 1960s is kind of a neat decade to talk about, not just because it was the birth of the Marvel Comics, which was, again, something that took everybody by storms and all these iconic characters, but it was also a return or a start of a return to what comic books should have been in America following the 1950s. And so hopefully we'll have some time to talk about what happened as we talk about these books. So,
All right. So again, I thought so. We picked five books. All right. I
mm-hmm.
just want to let everybody know. So we picked five books. So we got Fantastic Four number one. We have Superman. Oh, it just disappeared on my screen, and it just disappeared again. All right. So
Superman 149.
there you go. And then
I
we have
wanted to tell
Amazing
you,
Fantasy.
Amazing Fantasy. I did want to show you what was going on at DC around the same time as these other books. Avengers 57, one of my favorite issues with the first appearance of Vision, and then Vampirella from Warren Publishing.
Which I have a lot of questions. So I've never read Avengers 57, and when we get to that book, I have a lot of questions.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So
So,
before we get started, let me kind of lay on you a little bit of history, Zach. Let me be an old timer, put on my grizzled wig or my grizzled beard, I should say, maybe my wig too. Maybe I can have long, luscious silver locks for once instead of this ball cap. Um, but let's talk about what was happening in comic books in the 1960s. Everybody that reads comic books should know a little about a little box that have appeared in a lot of comic books around that time. You can see it on the first issue of Fantastic Four number one. You can see it on Amazing Fantasy 15. You can see it on the Avengers 57. You can see it on the Superman issue. It was the Comics Code Authority label. And it was a label that was created as a result of some Senate hearings Dun dun dun. That's right. So the golden age of comic books, when Batman was created and Superman was created in the 1930s and the 40s, it was a gold mine for people reading comic books. You don't understand that when we talk about, oh, X-Men #1 in the 1990s selling millions of copies, that was normal for comics in the 1930s and 40s. Millions of comic books were read in the United States during these decades. It was a very, very, very popular media, not only among kids, but adults. Uh, and there was a wide variety of comic books that you could choose from. You could pick the superhero comic books. There was sci-fi comic books. There was Western comic books. There was romance comic books. They came in post World War II. It became the hottest selling type of comic book out there were romance comic books. Men, women, older ages folks, they were reading these comic books. You would see them in the bus stops. You would see them on subways and whatever, and everybody was reading them. And as a result of that, they started pushing the envelope of what you could do with comic books. And there was a company called EC Comics. They made Tales for the Crypt. Did you ever hear of Tales of the Crypt?
Yeah.
Okay. So they made Tales from the Crypt. And EC Comics started pushing really the envelope, especially when it came to horror comic books, which was extremely popular post World War II. Like everybody wanted crime comic books and they wanted horror comic books. And that's where you get some of these classic covers that sometimes we post on the Last Comic Shop podcast at night with like severed heads and,
Some of the
gangsters shooting.
sickest covers you will ever see.
Exactly. But
Yes.
this started to get the attention of certain folks that thought that this was a bad influence for kids. They actually started trying to make the case that these horror comic books, these romance comic books, these comic books that kept on pushing the envelope were creating juvenile delinquency in America, very similar to what would happen eventually with video games, right? Video games are too violent, shooters are too violent, it's causing all these problems. Same thing happened in the 1950s. And as a result of that, they had some hearings up on Capitol Hill. They brought people in, and comic books were blackballed. They were thought of as un-American. There were book burnings of comic books all throughout the United States. They threw comic books on big piles. They got teenagers to come bring their comic books and throw them because they weren't considered. And the saving grace of all of this was the Comics Code. The Comics Code Authority, Zach. They put that stamp on there to say, hey, we are not going to make comic books that are super violent. We're not going to make comic books that are risque or talk about things like, I don't know, vampires. Like that's how crazy this was. Like you couldn't mention the undead or anything like that.
I'm reading like there's 18 things that you're not allowed to have in here. And I find one of the funniest one is you cannot use the words horror or terror, and it's not covered by the code.
Yes. So if you wanted that sticker on your comic book and wanted to put it out on the stands, and a lot of newspaper stands and grocery stores and whatever, major buyers would not purchase your book and put it out there for the general public unless it had that sticker on there. And
That's
so,
crazy.
so really, in America in the 1950s, a lot of comic book publishers either dropped books or they just went to safe topics. And one of the safest topics they had were actually superheroes. DC National, who was making Superman, Batman, whatever, they always played the good guys in all of this, like, oh, our comic books aren't dangerous to juveniles, despite the fact that this guy named Dr. Wortham, who wrote Seduction of the Innocent at the time, included all of this stuff about Batman
Well,
and
yeah,
Robin and Wonder Woman. And long story short, it was very easy to play superheroes. It was very easy to do that. And so, as a result, things like what we'll eventually talk about with Vampirella, they just weren't being published. Over in Europe, these comic books still continued, and that's why European comic books at the same time were probably like 2 decades ahead of us, because they just didn't have anything where they were stopped and like, you can't print this, or you can't do this, or you can't write stories about this. And so as a result of that, over the 1960s, and as we talk about these books over this time, you're going to see kind of a story unveil about like where the books were with things like DC, what Marvel did, and then eventually by the end, where the 60s ended up. And that hopefully will have an effect on the rest of these shows, the 70s, the 80s. You'll see some of that. So sorry,
Yeah.
I'm talking
So,
a lot here.
well, no, it's a history lesson for me too. This is just for fun for us. So this is, you know, yes, we're recording a show, and yes, there are listeners, but really, this is just me and Andy just having a conversation about the '60s,
Yeah,
something that we didn't get to live through, but we're here. We're gonna talk about it now.
right.
Now I'm looking through, like I said, there's 18 different things that the comic code you had to follow. Now some of these, yeah, I mean most of them are just common sense. Like I get it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I understand what they're saying, but you know, all scenes of horror, excessive bloodshed, gory, gruesome crimes, lust, sadism shall not be permitted. You're
Yeah,
taking away everything out of a horror story that you had going into this. Like you're literally taking everything out. Like it's
that
2026. People want to see blood. They want to see. That's why the comics code is no longer a thing, right?
right. It really
Yeah,
isn't. And by the 1970s, they started to move away from the comics code. And by the 1980s, really, yeah. I mean, they still put it on there, but it had been, there were a lot of comics being published without it. But just think of that. Just think of the words that you said, and think of some of the modern day comic books that are out there now, right?
right.
Couldn't have the Walking Dead, couldn't have Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips do Criminal, couldn't, because you couldn't do crime comic books because that was considered like, you couldn't have, gosh, probably things like The Boys, probably things like Invincible. You couldn't have the bloodshed there. Like,
No,
talk talk about, again, really tying American comic books hand behind its back and saying, this is all you can do. These are the safe topics. This is what you can print your books about. And still, Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko, and other folks in the 1960s found ways of telling really good stories despite those, again, despite having one hand tied behind their back.
literally,
And
and half the other.
yeah, yeah. So let's jump into it real quickly. So the first book I want to talk about, if you don't mind, is Fantastic Four #1. I think we do have to talk about that one, right? Because um, it's either that or Superman 149. I know you want to eventually get to Amazing Fantasy 15. That's the
Yes.
big flagship title.
Yeah, that's my
But
favorite.
like, but but to be blunt, you have to set the table for what happened with what was happening before Spider-Man hit the scene. Um, and so let's talk about so you decide. You want to talk about Fantastic Four #1, or you want to talk about Superman? They came out
Well,
at the same time.
let's do Fantastic Four because I find it so funny that so when Fantastic Four comes out, it comes out in 1961, and the whole idea for Fantastic Four is, hey, DC over there, they got this group called Justice League. I want that.
Yeah,
I want that.
absolutely.
They got a group
Stan
of all these people together, and I want that.
Stan Lee's, I think it was his 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 uncle or his father. Long story, it was more why it was he was the publisher of Timely Comics, which ended up
Martin
printing
Goodman was the publisher.
Martin Good,
Yeah.
yes, Martin Goodwin. And he was the publisher, and he did on the golf course say, "Hey Stan, I need you to make a superhero comic book. Those things seem to be selling pretty well." And Stan was like, oh, "All right, I'll see what I can do." And up until this point, Marvel was playing it safe. Again, they were just trying to keep their heads above water. So they were printing comic books that were primarily monster based. Again, you couldn't do horror, right? But
Nope.
there was still kind of like that need for something like that. It was still a very popular medium. So what did you do? You made monsters from outer space. You cut out all the bloodshed or whatever, but you made basically monsters, aliens that came from outer space or monsters that came up from the deep. But it's pretty much the same thing. They were still wanting to tell horror monster comic books without the bloodshed because they knew that still sold. They were still trying to tell Western books. That's things like Rawhide Kid. They were still somewhat telling romance books with things like Night Nurse and Millie the Model and Patsy Walker, who eventually would become Hellcat.
Yep.
So they're still doing all that stuff. But Stan Lee was given this assignment, and he's sitting there and he's racking his brain, and he's like, I just want to be. He wanted to be a novelist. He never wanted to do comic books. And he's just like, ah. And finally, his wife was like, why don't you just make the comic book you would want to read? Right? According to the story, that's what his wife told him. Write this comic book you want to read. And what you get is the Fantastic Four, which, to be honest, isn't very different from the monster books that Marvel had been putting out for a couple years previous to that. I don't know if when you read the Fantastic Four #1, you picked up the idea that the Fantastic Four weren't heroes.
No, no, they're
They
literally four people that don't know what they're doing at this moment. Like they are literally just trying to get their shit together.
not just that, but they're monsters.
Yes.
They are monsters. Not just the Thing who looks like one. You have the Invisible Woman or Invisible Girl at that point. Invisibility, that's a very popular, it's always, going back to the Invisible Man and stuff. That's something that's classic monster movie jazz. You had somebody that stretched and elongated. You had somebody that caught on fire. These were monsters. It's why, like, in recent years, one of my favorite series that was coming out was Al Ewing's Immortal Hulk run. There's an issue where the Hulk runs away to um, he's running from the Avengers. He was in a fight with the Avengers. He blew up a town or whatever. And so who does he run to? Banner runs to the Fantastic Four. And in this one moment, you have the Avengers come in, and the Fantastic Four is like, no, you're not going to touch him. Like, we're going to take care of the Hulk. And it's at that moment that you realize that the Fantastic Four actually have more in common with the Hulk than they do with Earth's Mightiest Heroes. And it's because their origins are among the monsters.
I can see that. Yeah, that's actually I really like that you bring that up. Yeah, I
Yeah.
can see that. Yeah. And like you can see, especially so I've always thought that the Thing and Hulk, like they've crossed paths so many times, and
Mm-hmm.
those two always just click. Always. And I get it. I mean, obviously it's the Thing, it's the Hulk, you know what I mean? But like you saying
Yes.
that, like all four of them, yes. Yeah, they're really
Right.
just, they're monsters.
But it plays not only on the fact that they're monsters, it plays on the fact of the super science that was going on at the time, kind of the science fiction aspects where they flashed off. There's a movie from the 1950s called Destination Moon, which basically kind of Stan Lee ripped off parts of the Fantastic Four's origin story from in that book. And you can read the original Golden Age comic book adaptation of that. But there are panels where a bunch of scientists build a rocket, are told not to take off, and they steal the rocket and then fly into space and go to the moon.
Hmm.
And and it's crazy, but he basically took that idea, he added some cosmic rays, gave them superpowers. But it was a very, very, very popular movie. Like, people knew what Destination Moon was coming out of the 1950s into the early 60s. So, like, Stan Lee's also playing upon things that people are very aware of in pop culture. And so he includes this part. He also includes like monsters underneath the earth, which is again going back to the Marvel, the things that was going on with Marvel at the time, with the monster books and things coming up from the surface of the earth and alien creatures, and the Fantastic Four have to fight that. And nobody worries about how the Fantastic Four have money, why they have a giant plane, how why can they can fly to Monster Island. Nobody cares. It's a
No.
very it's a very good adventure story. And it's got really great art by Jack Kirby, who had
Yes.
come back from Marvel. He had originally created Captain America for Marvel with Joe Simon, um, and he had left, and he was doing books over at DC. One of the ones was Challengers of the Unknown, which is pretty much the DC equivalent of the Fantastic Four. He was doing that book before he came over to Marvel, so he was very used to like a team of super scientists going out there and solving problems. So he was uniquely qualified to draw a book that Stan Lee was writing about these characters, and it was why they clicked so well on the Fantastic Four and became the hottest seller coming out of August of 1961.
Yeah,
So,
I like his body language in this book. Like
mm-hmm.
everybody from the little goofy characters that we get, like the little like demon looking things, to to Mole Man's facial features. I love the glasses, man.
Yes,
I love that. Like the you get like Ben Grimm does look like he literally just looks like one of the monsters. Like he does not look like what he would look like later on, a couple issues down the road where he's more formed. Like he's just so lumpy and bumpy.
yes, it
Yeah,
is
like
very. He's very undefined. He's very
yes.
like a. Unfortunately, at times he looks like a wad of cookie dough that was left out in the sun. It's an ugly look, but there are other times, man. There's this one scene where he rips up the manhole cover and he jumps down in the sewers and he's like floating along in the water and you just see his face like bob up above the surface and he's just got these mean eyes. He was supposed to be what was called the heavy of a book. And it's not because he was made out of rocks and he's heavy. A heavy of a book was supposed to be like that you didn't need an external antagonist. You had basically an internal antagonist. He was supposed to be a guy that you weren't sure whether he was a good guy or a
Or a
bad
bad guy.
guy or whether he was going to flip on the Fantastic Four at anybody. Kind of sort of like eventually what they did with the Hulk, like where you weren't sure of what his motives were. And that is a far cry from eventually what we would get, which is the heart of the Marvel universe, the blue-eyed, beautiful, bouncing baby thing. Like he's the guy that's like the heart of gold and the touchstone for all of the Marvel characters is Ben Grimm. But
He has
he
become
was
one of mine. Yeah.
at the beginning he was a dude that was really just angry
Very
and
angry. Which
um
rightfully so, wouldn't you be? If you're all handsome and shit, and then you become a big old
I,
rock
I don't
creature.
I don't know if you caught it in this too. There in the initial pages, there's like talk that maybe he was spurned the affections of Sue Storm for Reed
Yeah.
Richards, and he doesn't like that. Like he's like, why didn't you fall in love with me, Sue, as opposed to Reed? And it is sad. He's the only one, and it continues to this day that can't revert back and forth, unlike the rest of them.
Yeah, he's
Um,
stuck in his rocky stature with his little sunshades and his head tucked up underneath the coat with his little hat.
But as I often do on the last comic shop, I like to talk about one recommendation for every book. And I want to do that here. I want to give your readers one recommendation per one of the books we talk about. The best recommendation I can give you for Fantastic Four number one is Abrams Comics Arts came out with a book. It's called Fantastic Four Panel by Panel. And they basically break down the Fantastic Four number one in like page size panels. They take each individual panel of this book and they make them like page size. So you can really get, and there is like commentary and all this other jazz. But if you really want to see Some great stuff. Pick up from Abrams Comics Arts, Fantastic Four #1 panel by panel. They also did this thing for Amazing Spider-Man, but I've got a different one for Amazing Spider-Man.
That would be really cool to look at. So like when you have the Marvel Unlimited. So when you have
Yes.
the thing, you can click on it and go panel by panel. That would be so nice in like a treasury size. Like I get it, my iPad's pretty big, but like that would be so great.
So it's obviously an audio podcast, so you can't see it, but I wanted to kind of show Zach what I was talking about here.
Those that is cool.
Um,
Yeah, be
but
jealous,
as a
folks. You can't see it.
yeah, no, you can't. But that's what I'm hoping to do is get some of those readers
That's cool.
interested in that. But Chip Kidd did a great job with this,
I
so I would
have
highly recommend it.
you ever watch West Coast Avengers on YouTube?
I have not. I have not.
So he did a book for Jack Kirby. It's the many faces of Jack Kirby, and he blows up the panels and he gives you like you can like look at the details of every face, like of different characters. He did 2 books of it, and it's really good.
Okay,
Doctor Doom's on the cover. Oh man.
I'll have to check it out. But in the interest of time, I think we should move on. So we just talked about Fantastic Four #1.
Which I did
Let's
get to
talk.
read. Now, the next book that we're going to talk about, unfortunately, it is not on DC's digital library. For what reason? It goes from like 131 to like 233 in Superman. Like you're
Wow.
missing. Yeah, it's bad.
All right. Well, the reason why I wanted to talk about this particular book, it's Superman 149, is because not only does a fun thing happen in it, which is kind of different for Superman at that time, um, but also it was released in, I think it was November of 1961. I think that's the date published. So it would have been about the same time as Fantastic Four #1. So we're talking about Marvel and what they're doing and all the stuff that they're doing, revolutionizing comic books or whatever. But obviously, you wouldn't have Fantastic Four #1 unless Martin Goodwin went to Stan Lee and said, "You know what's really good is that stuff going on over at DC. Make those kind of books." And so they had to come up with something that was similar. So in Superman 149, Superman dies. No fooling, Superman dies. Now, I know that a lot of folks know about Superman dying in the 90s with the death of Superman. He fights Doomsday or whatever. But this is actually the first time he died in comics. And it was they called it an imaginary tale, which was in essence their terminology for an Elseworlds or a what if at the time, but they didn't have that terminology yet. So they were just trying to tell a story. It's done by the writer is Jerry Siegel, who was the creator of Superman. So it's coming from straight from the creator's mouth, with Kurt Swan doing the art. And Kurt Swan is arguably one of the best Superman artists of the 60s and 70s. He made
I
the
agree with
iconic
that.
Superman. So, long story short, in this story, Lex Luthor pretend he's like, I'm going to, denounce my wicked ways. I'm going to cure cancer. I'm going to do a lot of other cool things and I just want to be a good guy now. And he convinces Superman of all this stuff. And Superman's like, sure, we should let him out of prison. Not only that, I'll give him a watch like I give Jimmy Olsen. So he can be Superman's pal, Lex Luthor. And criminals come to him and like, Lex, you can't be serious, right? This is all a ploy or something. You're not really doing this. And he's like, oh yeah, no, I am. And he convinces even the criminals. He turns all the other criminals in, lets Superman arrest all of them. And it all leads up to this one day when Alex is in his moon base, which Superman gave him because he was such a great guy. And he's like, Superman, you gotta come up to my moon base. I gotta show you something. And the moment Superman walks in, he just bombards him with kryptonite rays. Just like it was all a trap. It was all a setup. He brings Superman in there, bombards him with kryptonite, ties him down, bombards him even more, brings Perry White and Lois Lane and Jimmy Olsen up to the moon base too. and
Jesus.
and puts them in a room with glass so he can watch. He's like, I'm gonna have you watch me kill Superman, and he does. He just kills Superman, and he's dead. He's truly dead. And at the end of the story, Supergirl, who they just had introduced a little bit earlier to this book, comes, arrests Lex Luthor, and becomes the new Superman of Earth. And they're like, at the end, they're like, "Yep, wasn't that a fun story? Superman will be back next month." But at the end, they're like, "This is the story of how Superman died." So, um, interesting stuff. Like they weren't just playing. They weren't just doing silly things over at DC. I thought this was kind of a neat story.
That is
Um,
pretty fun. I'm kind of bummed that, their digital library had to let me down.
it's true. It's true. But if anybody out there has an opportunity, I think it's in one. There's a couple Silver Age omnibuses of Superman that you can pick up that includes this issue. And it is kind of creepy how like Lex is like super nice until he isn't, and then you're like, son of a gun, it was all a trap this whole time,
I
just to
mean,
let.
Lex is pretty good at that.
He is.
He's pretty good at
He
that.
he is, and it's neat that they see the story through, right, in true what if fashion. You know what I mean? They say Superman's dead. Like, what would happen? Well, Supergirl would take over. Like, there
Yeah.
is a Supergirl, so like she would bring Lex to Luthor, and she would become the new Superman of Earth. It all
Hmm.
makes sense. It all makes sense, and it's kind of a neat little what if story. So if you have an opportunity to check that issue out, that's just for funsies, yo. That doesn't have a lot of history or whatever. That's just for funsies. But it was what was happening at DC around the same
Yeah.
time as these
That's
Marvel
better than
books.
what they were doing to my boy Batman. Yeah, I got a
Batman's,
couple of those books, man. They're so goofy. Like it's
yes.
crazy. You would think, all right, so you have Superman battling Lex Luthor, and yes, Lex Luthor takes him up to the moon. Oh, that's a little campy. All right, I'll give you that. But I'd rather see Superman go up to the moon than Batman taking on aliens.
Yeah. But but to my point, Zach, those were the safe areas.
Yeah,
You couldn't
DC,
you
you
could
couldn't do anything like murder or anything. You had to do,
exactly.
yeah,
You couldn't tell. How are you supposed to tell a Batman story without hard crime? Right? Like, try to tell us a Batman story without gunplay and shooting and
you're not
none
wrong.
of that. You can't. So what do? They put him in outer space. They make him fight super gorillas. They make him.
Yeah,
They give him Batwoman, and they give Robin Batgirl, so that there's no thoughts
yeah.
about what Batman and Robin could be doing in the. They had to play it all safe. And the easiest way to do that was to give them alien threats. It just seemed to be like, this is not going to offend anybody on the comics code. We'll just do this. And so you do get goofy stories with Batman that don't make any sense. But you also get some of the best Batman villains out of that era. Like, you get the Clayface that we know, the Clayface Matt Hagen that turns into everything, the amorphous blob Clayface. That comes because it's a superhero thing. It's
You
a
get Mr. Freeze too.
right. You get
Yeah.
these characters that are kind of more science fiction based. And it's because they couldn't make criminals. They couldn't make bad
You get
guys that shot
Hugo
gun.
Strange with his Monster Men.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I mean, that was from the 1930s. That's one of the early issues. But wait,
Yeah, but you
let's
still
move.
they get to come back. They get to come back.
They do. So let's
Yeah.
move. So let's finally get to the book you've been wanting to talk
All
about.
right.
Amazing Fantasy 15. Here we
Amazing
go.
Fit. Okay, so let me background story. So when I was a kid, you used to be able to buy the original Marvel Legends, and they came with a comic book. First
Mhm.
one I ever bought was the one that came with Amazing Fantasy 15. So when Stan Lee comes up with the idea of Spider-Man, he is the everyday man. He literally faces the same problems that we do when you were a teenager. Every problem. He's a nerd. Nobody likes him. He gets beat up. Like kids felt that. Like, come
Yeah,
on, man. Like this was the perfect book. He got it so he piggybacks off the Fantastic Four because the Fantastic Four has a family dynamic. And yes, you have
Right.
like the Thing and Johnny Storm's like relationship and the way that they bicker and everything. And you see some of the early Spider-Man, like how he always has his quick little one-liners and everything. And like you see that build up, and then he puts it into this Amazing Fantasy 15 that they told him that was a bad idea. And he's like, well, this book's getting canceled anyway, so I'm just gonna throw it out there. And look now. That is your flagship character. It's not
It
Fantastic
is.
Four anymore. It's not Doctor Doom. It's not all hell. It's any of them. It's not Hulk. It's not the
Right.
Avengers. It's not Captain America. It's none of them. It's literally Spider-Man. And it's because he is the everyday person. Like he is like you. He's like me. Well, eventually he's like you and me. He gets married and then he's stuck being a teenager again, and then he's stuck in his 30s and
And that's the amazing thing about his design too. He wears a full mask. You can't see any part of his face, which
no.
helps out with the whole idea that like he could be anybody. He could be you, he could be me, he
And
could
like
be
Steve
anybody.
Ditko did the way that if you read Amazing Fantasy 15, the my favorite part is like now you look at art and everybody's like all realistic and stylized. Steve Ditko had Spider-Man in some of the most impossible poses ever. One of my favorites is he's like upside down and like the way that his body is contorted, he looks like a real spider.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
I love that.
absolutely. Well, it comes from again, like we talked about with the Fantastic Four. These are all kind of based in the Marvel monster books that were coming out at the same time. Oftentimes, with those Marvel monster books, one of the things that they used to do, and it's actually a holdover from EC Comics, which I talked about earlier. EC Comics, when they used to come out with science fiction books and monster books and horror books, their thing was the Twilight Zone esque twist, where you would have a short story right at the and then at the end there would be a twist like, oh no, I've been dead all along, and or something like that. You know what I mean? They were
Yep.
very, very famous for the twist. Marvel picked that up and they started doing that with their own stories where there was a twist at the end of it. In fact, there's a story in the original Amazing Fantasy 15, because people don't realize that this was just one story in a book full of other books. In Amazing Fantasy 15, it was like there was like four stories in that. One of the stories in there was about like these people, and they're like, I don't know, they're in a shirt and tie, and they look like very normal, but by the end of it, they actually have like four arms, and they were the aliens all along, right? And they're like, oh no, they're gonna find us. We were the aliens all along, and so there is a twist in this book too, and I hope you realize that. What's the twist, Zach? What's the twist in this book? Like, what's the moment that you're like, oh shoot, this is a little bit different. It becomes the defining
It's
moment of Spider-Man,
it's the
but it's a
moment that he doesn't stop the guy and he ends up killing Uncle Ben.
right
And
that
that's the twist. That's
that
what
it's
makes him
this,
become the superhero.
but it is truly a twist. It is like there was the gangster, and sure, it's a morality story now. It's like a moral. It's like with great power comes great responsibility, but it's
Yep.
also a twist. It's like, oh shoot, had this just been one story, it's just like he could have stopped the robber the whole time.
Yep.
Um, that's the thing. It's amazing how like this stuff didn't come out of nowhere. Like
No.
they had been telling these stories for years, and then finally they were like, no, all the parts are there. Let's crystallize it into its proper form, and then it's just like, oh wow, this is selling tons and tons of books.
I will say Sam Raimi's Spider-Man does a really good job at redoing this whole book.
Yeah.
Really does. Really does.
Well,
Like it's perfect.
not only him, but the recommendation that I have for this particular book is actually part of the Spider-Man cartoon series that was released in the 1960s. Ralph Bashki, who ended up doing things like Cool World and he was a real pioneer in animation. He did an episode of the origin of Spider-Man. It was actually the first time I had ever, as a kid, ever experienced the origin of Spider-Man outside of the comic books. Um, and it's amazing. Even some, gosh, what was that put out? Almost 60 years ago. this episode of this comic. I would put it up against anything. I think it's very well told. It's very powerful. It tells the story of Spider-Man. Um, I don't know.
I'll have to
Track
look
it
it up.
down.
Yeah, I'll
It's
have to look it up.
most likely on YouTube, for sure. It's just called The Origin of Spider-Man. It comes from the Spider-Man 1960s cartoon. But it just tells the origin story, and especially the ending where he goes and finds the robber, the burglar, and gets revenge or whatever, brings him to justice. It's powerful stuff, and so that's my recommendation for that. Check it out. It's
All
real good.
right, so now I have a plot twist for you. I told you there
All
was going to
right,
be a plot twist in this.
sure.
So we're going to take a break. Our next book we're going to do is Avengers 57, which again, I have questions. Now, we're going to have a little I have a game for everybody that's going to be on the
Oh,
show for the decades, all right? So
all
we just
right.
talked about Spider-Man, okay? Now,
Mm-hmm.
his rogues gallery is Murderer's Row, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Same with Batman, right?
Okay.
All right. You see where I'm going here, don't you?
I hope. I guess.
All right.
Shrugs.
So who wins? The
Who
Rogues
wins?
Gallery of Spider-Man or the Rogues Gallery of Batman? Who wins?
Oh,
Who's better? In your opinion, who's the better ones?
well, it's Spider-Man's. It's Spider-Man's Rogues Gallery, which is
See,
better.
I'm Batman.
Well, we can discuss this. You know, I don't know. As I've grown older, for example, I've become less and less of a fan of the Joker. As I've grizzled with age, I find that the Joker stories, I like the gangster Joker, but I don't like the like agent of chaos, anarchy, killing for killing's sake. I don't know what stories. He just doesn't seem very interesting to me. Versus the Green Goblin, which, my gosh, the things they've done with the Green Goblin. Heck, they made him the director of Shield, almost the president of the United States for it. He's a great villain. Him, Doctor Octopus. They have all these. They have better designs too, man. One thing that Steve Ditko was able to do, man, they came up with great designs for these characters. Like again, from Doc Ock to Mysterio to Electro, even with his dumb lightning bolt head. Like that's still awesome. Craven the Hunter, Chameleon, and eventually later on when you get to Venom and Carnage, great designs for those characters. Now, I'm not going to say that Batman's Rogues Gallery aren't great,
Oh, they are
but
amazing.
my favorite one is Two Face. Like Two Face is good. Two Face, maybe Riddler, they're good. I can't even name a third one that I
Oh,
really
come
like.
on, you can't. Well, we can't say Doctor Mr. Freeze. Mr. Freeze he's all right. In the '90s, his design was really fun. When they revamped him, he looks really
Yes,
good.
I
Um,
like Man Bat. I do like Man
yes,
Bat.
Man Bat
Uh,
is one of my favorites.
um, but I mean, compare Man Bat to like, oh, I don't know, like the Scorpion. Like, there's no
Man Bat's
comparison.
kicking his ass. What do you
No, there's no
mean? Yeah.
comparison.
Oh,
You can like. I will say this about Batman's villains. He needs them. He really does. Because oftentimes the supporting characters in Batman books, whether it's the villains, whether it's Robin, whether it's Commissioner Gordon or whatever, they're really the reason why the Batman books are good. Batman's kind of, as my co-host Chad often points out, he's kind of like the water, and you pour him in the pitcher, he just fills whatever space. He's like Bruce Lee, just fills whatever space you need him to do, whatever you need him for that story. If you need him to be the master tactician, if you need him in outer space, if you need him to be a boots on the ground crime fighter or whatever, the Rogues Gallery helps that. Spider-Man, though, like, you could read a Spider-Man comic and not have Rhino and it still be a good Spider-Man comic. I'm just
that's
saying.
because Spider-Man has real world problems where Batman does not. That's the problem. Everything around Batman is his real world problem. You know what I mean? You see what I'm saying? Like
No,
without you have Commissioner Gordon doing one thing and then you have Robin out here doing another, and Batman is needed by them. See, like he's rich, dude. He has no real world problems. He has unlimited fundage. Even when you take the money away from him, he still has no problems.
All
Like
right, that's
the
true.
latest issue they just did for the Matt Fraction run, they literally just raided all of his back caves, and he still won somehow, some way. Like it made no sense to me. Like
Uh,
he's
it's
it's Batman. He's unbeatable.
it's very true. The absolute Batman is not rich whatsoever.
No,
Yet
and he still
somehow
kicks ass.
he still has a dump truck that he got somehow. I don't know. I listen. I challenge you. I know that you put this podcast out on YouTube. I think you can add quizzes to that, or they're
Yeah, you
kind of like
can.
poll lights. Throw that question out there for your listeners. But which one is the better rogues gallery? Spider-Man, Batman? Let's put it out to the viewers. Let's listen out to
All
the
right.
listeners. Let's see what they say. I think it's Spider-Man, but you're right. They're probably the two most iconic rogues galleries in all of comics. I don't think anybody, Superman, Fantastic Four, X-Men, they none of them have a rogues gallery like
No, see,
Batman
that's
and
why I had to
Superman.
pick those two. I didn't have anybody else. And it sounded good because, like, when you think of the 60s, you think of all the great villains and the characters from Spider-Man because, I mean, they were all, you know what I mean? They're all pretty much from the 60s. It's great. Batman, he came out in the 30s. You know what I mean? Like, he, cheater.
But without the 60s and Batman, I mean that's when you had the 66 television show and they brought new life to all of that rogues
Yes.
gallery. The Cesar
Yes.
Romero Joker and Julie Newmar as Catwoman and
Which that
Burgess
man
Meredith.
refused to shave off his mustache. He refused, said he
He
would not,
did.
and they painted right
He
over it.
they just painted right over it.
Yeah.
All right. So, in the interest of time, let's move on to our fourth book here. We're talking about what Avengers 57, which was, I think, the first book that I thought of when you said, hey, pick some books from the 60s. I wanted to talk about this, and that's just for personal reasons. And it's because it's the first appearance of the Vision, who is one of my favorite characters of all time. But it actually wasn't the first appearance of a Vision in Marvel comic books. They had made a Vision character in the 1930s. He was from some alternate dimension. He's still called the Vision. He looked very similar. But there was a Golden Age Vision. He wasn't a robot like he was eventually in the 1960s, but that was part of the deal. A lot of people don't know that when Roy Thomas took over as one of the main writers after Stan Lee in the 1960s, so we're about the mid 1960s at this point. When he took over, one of his jobs was to create new characters. This was, they needed to sell more books. They needed to get more books out there. And so as a result of that, Roy, I'm not going to say cheated, but what he did was he went back and he looked at the golden age that Marvel had had and said, what if I made characters that were similar to some of these characters, but also different? And again, one of the ones he picked was the Vision because of his striking appearance. And then so he gives this to John Buscema, and you get which is arguably one of the most iconic covers of all time, with the Vision cover from '57. He's standing there all in red, just kind of with his hand out, and the smoke and the dust, and the Avengers are very small. The rest of the Avengers that were in that book, but
It's badass. Is what it
it
is.
is.
It's a badass cover, and yes, his character design is pretty. Like it is just beautiful. Like it's really nice.
It
Like I
is.
can't like green and yellow go so well, and yes, he does have a red face, which it fits. Like I mean, I'm cool with it. Like I ain't got no complaint. But now, before explain to me this, you're gonna find out the next issue, correct? If I read issue 58, is that where he becomes an Avenger?
Yes, that's when
Okay.
they officially invite him to the team.
Okay.
Yes.
That's question one. Question two, how many damn Ultrons is there?
Wow. Well, at the last guess, I don't. I man, I think in the 1990s they were up to already like Ultron 13 or something like that. Now, it's neat. The recommendation that I have for this particular issue is you read a little bit later on. Let me see if I can. I think there's an issue that happens a couple issues later. Um, I think it's like 68 or something like that. It's about 10 issues after this. It's a 3 issue story arc where they first introduce adamantium to the Marvel
Okay.
universe. And they bring like people like Thor and Iron Man in, and they're beating on the adamantium. Oh, it must be stronger than vibranium. Like it's super powerful, and like nobody can. And the Vision, kind of still a little bit under the control of Ultron at this point, basically helps Ultron steal the adamantium to build a brand new body, and that's his first adamantium body.
Hmm.
At this point, Ultron had been introduced a couple issues earlier to this. As everybody knows, Hank Pym created this artificial intelligence. It went against him, blasted him with some ray, so he forgot that he did it, and then basically built itself 5 bodies in a row. So the Ultron that you meet in 57 is actually Ultron 5. It's the 5th iteration of Ultron since
Okay.
Ultron 1, which was created by Hank Pym. So he's been
Which,
busy. He's
yeah,
been
which
busy.
Hank Pym is in like his. This man has changed characters so many times because he's Goliath now, right?
Yes,
Yes.
yes. He's a play on. So he originally started off as the original Ant Man. Again, in the 90s, he was arguably, I think he's like the 4th character that they came up with superhero wise. He predates
Yes.
like folks like the X-Men and a lot of other characters in Marvel Comics. The original Ant Man. From there, he eventually becomes Giant Man, primarily because he's hanging out with the Avengers, and later on, it would be explained that he felt uh, inadequate in the eyes of the Wasp. Like it wasn't the Wasp cared, but he cared. He was hanging out with people like Hulk and Iron Man and Thor, and he's like, I'm this little guy. And so he's like, I'll be a big guy like them. I'll be Giant Man, right, Wasp? Like that makes me. Hank Pym has always been about like having an inferiority complex and not really thinking he's the best hero out there. It's actually pretty sad, to be honest. Like it's a pretty tragic uh, story for a superhero. But um, the more interesting thing about all of what happens in 57 is eventually what they would do later with Vision, where they retconned him into being the same person as the original Human Torch from the 1930s. So in Marvel Comics #1, there's an android that breaks into fire. That's the original Human Torch. That's Jim Hammond. And he was a robot. And so eventually they were like, well, what if they were the same robot? Except Ultron took away his flame powers and gave him density powers and made him look different. But that's why his face is red. That's why his face is
Hmm.
red.
That's I didn't know that.
And then later on, John Byrne came in and said, in the 80s, they said, no, that's stupid. They're not the same character. I'm going to bring back the original Human Torch, and they're 2 different characters. And then after that, other writers came in. Kurt Busiek came back in and said, like, no, 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 they are the same character. Kang came in at one point and split the timeline and made 2 versions of the Jim Hammond Ultron or Human Torch. One that remained the Human Torch, and the other one that became Vision. Stupid as hell. I won't
That's a
lie,
lot
but
to unpack.
it
Unpack.
is.
Jesus.
It is. But yeah, it's crazy to think that probably for about 10, 15 years, that was the backstory of the Vision. He was the original Human Torch.
So
Um,
now now obviously he's a robot, but
mhm,
he also has feelings. He has
he
emotions.
does.
Yeah.
He has a liver. He he has kidneys. They're all just made out of like I don't know plastics.
I was
That's
gonna
what
say,
they.
yeah, I was really intrigued by that because I've never really read the Avengers. So like I've said on your show multiple times, I've never read the X-Men because I'm intimidated by so many characters. And I think
Yeah,
that I've never read the Avengers because there's just so much going on.
yeah. No,
So
it's true.
like this was cool
This
for me to like go back and like see this. And like Black Widow's character design is goofy as hell in this.
Yes, yeah, she has the bob and the terrible gray. This is very shortly after that they would give her the black skin tight jumpsuit, which has become iconic for her. But she jumped around. She had a lot of weird designs early on until they decided on the black cat suit from, which is pretty much from the Avengers TV show that was going on in Great Britain at the time. Emma Peel, who wore this slinky black like leather jumpsuit and was like, "Oh, that's hot as hell. Let's just use that for anybody. That's a super spy." Like people love that, so that's what they did. But no, it's crazy. At this time, Stan Lee was kind of like, "No, don't put it Captain America or Iron Man or Thor on the book." So you had this weird team of like Goliath and Hawkeye and Wasp and Black Panther, people that didn't have their own books, but were still characters in the Marvel universe. And they're like, all right, we'll just throw them on this team. And Vision was massively popular out of the gate.
I could see why.
Um, it not only because of his visual design, but this was also about the same time that Star Trek was very popular with the Mr. Spock character, and like the so people kind of like that logical guy that like spoke in like, oh, I don't think this is like very intelligent and emotionless, and could he feel pain, and stuff like that. Like people love that jazz around this time. So like he's very, very popular. And I don't know if you read or noticed towards the tail end of this book, uh, Roy Thomas actually started putting some stuff from poetry. There's this scene where like basically this kid finds Ultron's
Yeah, it's
head and
the
kicking
yeah,
it
it's at the end.
around. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's from poetry. And again, it starts to show how like the 60s were evolving, the 60s were changing. What you could do in comic books was changing. What kind of stories? It was becoming a little bit more intellectual. They were appealing to more of the college set. Comic books were no longer just for kids anymore, like they were in the 1950s. They were getting back to what it was before those hearings that I talked about at the beginning of the show, where adults could read comic books, that at least college kids should read comic books. And so Roy Thomas was trying to inject some of that intellectualism back into comic books to be like, yeah, this is
Yeah.
not just kiddie fair.
Go
This is
read his
something.
X-Men run.
Exactly. His X-Men
Yes.
run is good. Oh,
Yes.
with the Neil Adams art,
Yeah.
man, that's some of the
You
best.
can't they can't see it, but you can see it. I got that Omni right here. Oh
I
yeah.
know. I know. That is that can be a recommendation. If you've never read I think it's only like 10 or 12 issues. But it's basically Roy Thomas and Neil Adams comes on the book, and basically saves the X-Men. And it's crazy to think what that book could have been had they not been like, no, this book is still not selling, so we'll put it into reprints for 30 something issues, from
Yeah,
like
which that's crazy too.
to, yeah, think about that. There was a time when X-Men was selling so poorly that for like 30 some odd issues, they just decided it was better to put out reprints than actually make new stories and spend time on creating new stories for
Now,
the X-Men.
all right. So we got to. I'm looking at the Omni right now. I just want to talk about this. So we have Warner Roth. All right, these are just the pencilers. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
Don Heck,
Yep.
Neil Adams, Jim Steranko,
Yes.
Barry Windsor Smith,
Yep.
and you get both of the Buscema brothers.
You do. You
Yes,
do.
plus
It's
three other ones, but they're not as big of a highlight as those ones.
it's a neat series of books, but in my heart of hearts, especially when they introduce Havoc and Polaris, when they bring the Sentinels back. Um, I don't know. They After being in the wilderness for so long with the X-Men, they were finally starting to hit um, a stride, and then they decided to put the book into reprints. And it wasn't until Giant Size X-Men, almost, oh gosh, like what, 5 years later,
Yep.
that it was officially something that they wanted to invest money in and time in again. So let's finish up this episode, Zach. I know we're going a little bit long here, but we have one more book to talk about, right?
Yeah, we are going to talk about Vampirilla #1 by Warren Publishing.
That's true. That's right. That
Yeah.
is right. So as I mentioned at the top of the show, there was a comics code, right, Zach? This
Yes.
was still in effect when this particular book. But why? I will ask you a question, Zach. See if you can answer this. Why was the stuff that was why is this not have a comics code? Like, why is this?
Because technically it's not a comic book, it's a magazine.
It's a magazine. That's right. They could skirt around this stuff. They could skirt around this thing. And so Warren Publishing put out a really great selection of magazines that had comic book stories in them around this time. Creepy, eerie, Vampirella. Um, as I get older and older, the stories from these books, they're something special for me. It's kind of like what eventually they would do with like things like heavy metal over across the pond. Um, Fun stuff. And so I wanted Zach to read this because I had no idea whether or not Zach has ever read any of this stuff.
No, I always thought this stuff was too adult for me, even as an adult now. Like I've always thought, like even with heavy metal, I always thought that was like too grown up for me.
uh,
So
so what are your first reactions of reading Vampirella issue 1, especially the first Vampirella story?
I can see why you like it.
It is all kinds of bubbles over
But
certain
But
areas.
yeah, but to be honest with you though, if you think about it, if this was written in a comic book, it probably only breaks like two of the codes.
You're
Seriously.
very, it's very true. So these are vampire. First off, Vampirella is not really a vampire.
No.
She's from a planet in which they don't have water. Instead of having water, they have blood. So everybody drinks blood like people on Earth drink water. All right, fine. It's an alien planet. These astronauts crash land. She's like, hey, look at these astronauts. I'm thirsty. Oh, look, they have water in their they're made of water. Okay, and I'm going to go to this other planet and find all these other people. So it's very tongue in cheek. It's
Yeah.
very like late 60s horror. It kind of reminds me of things like the original Night of the Living Dead movie. Um, it doesn't take itself too seriously. It is kind of a little bit camp too. In fact, did you read the rest of the stories in this the first issue, or just the
Nope.
Vampirella story?
Just read the Vampirella one.
All right. Well, there's some other. They're also horror stories. They deal with some vampires, and they're actually a lot more gruesome than this particular story. I think the next story after the first appearance of Vampirella is a story about like people being in this lifeboat, and the people start like dying one by one, and they're like, oh my gosh, somebody in the lifeboat must be a vampire. Somebody is like, so like it gets down, it gets, and all of a sudden it's just this one sole woman left, and she's like, well, everybody's dead, like I must be safe now. And it turns out the boat was the vampire in one of those, classic twists. The boat was just a shapeshifter and
I
was
feel
pretending to
like
be a
I've
boat.
watched that on something before. Yeah.
It's kind of a goofy story, but it's actually much more adult than this first issue of Vampirella. The thing that's adult about this is the sex. Let's
It
be
really,
honest.
yeah.
Like you couldn't do this in a Marvel comic book. Even that wink, wink, nod, nod, everything is partially covered. Um, but she's
Oh,
talking about bubbles.
there's one scene where it's a full tit out. I don't even want to hear it. That was a whole tit out. Whole tit. I saw that. And that's when I texted you. I said, I see why you like this book.
It's something else. It's something else. But compared to some of the stuff that eventually would come in heavy metal and later on in the 70s, this is nothing. This is nothing. But again, to my point, had there not been a comics code, had there not been this need to tie comic books behind the back, you might have seen this in mainstream stuff, not just in comic magazines that were kind of the underground counterculture at the time. You would have seen this. You would have seen, horror and crime comic books continue to progress and grow. And to be honest, I like this stuff so much more, but just because it does show that comic books can be more than just capes and superheroes jumping off of rooftops, or even the neat ideas that they were doing in Spider-Man and Fantastic Four. This shows what comic books are capable of. And it wasn't until late 70s, early 80s that you started getting that stuff in mainstream books again with mainstream characters. And so it's sad, but that's part of the lesson we're learning today. So,
Yeah, so the comics code, and you'll see it. So actually, now you laid that seed. Now I have to talk about that the next episode because they do end up. Stan Lee tries to fight it when he does
mm-hmm.
the Harry Osborn overdose, and
Yep.
that was like they came to him over that, and then like the what was it? Who was that? The oh shit, the FDA maybe no.
Well, it was a story about
Yeah,
drug addiction, and they thought that it was an important story to tell about drug addiction and the
and the
effects of
comics
drug
code
addiction.
said no. He said,
Yeah,
"Well, I'm not putting it on my book then."
yeah, he didn't. And
Yep,
later on, they would have other books like in DC comic books, Green Arrow's sidekick Speedy gets addicted to heroin,
yep,
again showing the effects of and they didn't put the comics code, and so
nope.
they started getting away from it,
Yeah.
and it didn't blow up the universe, and so they were like, okay, maybe it's all right to start telling stories like this again. And then Batman starts fighting real crime again, and there's that he starts going back to just fighting criminals, and there being gunplay, and again, lots of stuff was taken off of the table because
Well, well,
of this.
so at the time of recording this, so I cut my grass today. All right.
Mm-hmm.
And I listen to podcasts when I'm cutting grass. Well, I just so happened you saying Batman, and we're going to talk about this real quick. I actually have this trade paperback. You guys were reviewing Last Comic Shop podcast. Wink, wink, plug. You guys were reviewing 10 Nights of the KG Beast.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yes. Now,
Okay.
this man literally cuts his hand off. You see it, blood everywhere. Dude, if that they tried to make that in the 60s, they're canceled in a heartbeat.
Right.
And I love that story. I actually really like Jim Starlin writing Batman. And then, so at the time of this recording, this week, I'm releasing A Death in the Family. Me and Justin from the Iron Age of comic books read that. And that was the book that got Jim Starlin pretty much fired off of Batman.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So I mean, but to your point, like again, they could have told stories like that. They were moving toward stories like
Yep.
that in the early 1950s. EC comic books, these folks, they were pushing the envelopes. You had the first graphic novels. We did an episode on the last comic shop called "It Rhymes with Lust." It was the first graphic comic. They didn't know where to put it. It was just a crime comic book. It was a crime romance comic book. It's about like this guy that's running a newspaper. He comes to town. He ends up falling, like there's like a femme fatale that lives in this small town who's taken over because she married into old money, and like he has to set. It's a goofy, but they didn't know where to put it. They're like,
Right.
where do we put this? Where do we, it's not a comic book, but it's more. It's not a novel. It's a graphic novel, and they were starting to do things like that, but nope. Comics code came along, the seduction of the innocent, all that jazz, the book burnings, and comic books were blackballed. And people, Will Eisner, Will Eisner, who we have the Eisner Awards for, right? One of the
Yep.
most celebrated people in all of comic books. Um, he quit comic books and went into the furniture salesman business. Why? Because being a comic book creator was such an insult
That's
that
crazy.
that you couldn't tell people what you did for a living. They thought you were like a serial killer. Like it was so looked down upon that he had to leave the business for years
That's
because there was just no way. There was and it was just all because juvenile
And to think
delinquency.
about that now, 2026, this man has a whole awards after him at San Diego Comic Con.
That's right. That's right. But that's what I hope that everybody gained from today's episode. I'm sorry I was a little bit long winded at times, but
No,
it's
it's history lesson with Andy Larson. That's what it is.
it is the and I hope that as your fans listen to the rest of these episodes, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, and you, Zach, as you're talking to the rest of some great folks that are going to be coming on for the rest of your episodes. I hope some of this stuff about how the comics code changed and how comic books were fighting its way back from censorship, like it just kind of, it's just like, oh yeah, no, this makes sense. This
Well,
is
you really
actually
just helped me with the 70s because we gotta talk about the issue of Harry Osborn with his drug addiction and Speedy because that cover is iconic for the Green Lantern Green Arrow. Like that is very it's
yes,
very sought after. You see it, you know exactly what it is.
right,
So with that, I
absolutely.
want to thank you for being on the show, talking about the fabulous '60s or the whatever the hell they gave the '60s. I probably messed that up,
Swinging,
but swinging
swinging,
'60s, that's it.
the swinging 60s, baby.
So yeah, so if you want to listen to more Andy, all you got to do is go to lastcomicshoppodcast.com. Their catalog is evergreen, and they have a website that has a great shop where they sell a mass number of things: t-shirts, shorts, sometimes swords, sometimes helmets. See, I listen to the show. I'm getting better at this.
That's true.
Yeah.
That is true. www.lastcomicshoppodcast.com. Rate, review, and subscribe. And make sure that you're reviewing, and subscribing to Thompson's Comics Corner. Thank you so much, Zach, for having me on this show. And let me just, again, be an old geezer talking about some stuff that I learned over the years. So,
Well, with that, we have the '70s coming up next week on the next edition of whatever the hell this is going to be, like the Super Decade Spectacular. That sounds pretty cool. It's going to be Justin from the Iron Age of or the Iron Age of Comics, where they go like really in depth in their show. I always try to give everybody a plug. They go really in depth into their show, whatever they're reading, and I've learned a lot of things from them and their shows. If you're cutting your grass and you have a really big lawn, you can get at least one episode in. So I promise. So with that, I want to say thank you guys for being, for listening, and peace out, Cub Scouts.